In 2016, there was a decline in black voter turnout for the first time in 20 years. That's according to the Pew Research Center. In fact, that comes after a historic high of about 67% in the 2012 elections.
Well, our next guest wants to break records during the 2020 presidential election. Here with us this morning is Cliff Albright. He is the co-founder and executive director of Black Voters Matter. Cliff, good morning, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm a native New Yorker born in the Bronx. So
there you go.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you. So obviously the topic on everybody's mind, even at the top of that the R&B battle with Brandy and Monica last night, getting people to vote for the 2020 election. Historically, looking back at 2016, what do you think contributed to that low black voter turnout?
Well, there are several things that contributed. Part of it was on the candidates themselves. Part of it was on a disinformation campaign that was targeted largely to younger black voters. But the biggest issue, I argue, and one that's the most underreported issue of 2016, is voter suppression. A lot of people forget. They forgot then, and we're still forgetting about it, that 2016 was the first presidential election to take place after the gutting of the Voting Rights Act. And yet a lot of people went into it thinking that this was just going to be another presidential year, and it wasn't. And so we saw, and we have seen over the past recent years, ever since the gutting of the Voting Rights Act by the Supreme Court, we've seen all kinds of attacks on voting, from photo ID to cutting back polling places. There have been thousands of polling places closed and all sorts of other mechanisms. And all of that played out in that 2016 election. And you don't have to suppress every vote, but if you do the right number of votes on the margins in key states and key precincts, you can steal an election.
And so many people this year are talking about what the election will look like in terms of suppression, especially with the talks of what's happening with the postal system, right? So to be continued on that. But tell me about your organization in particular and what you're doing right now to zero in to make sure those kind of issues don't happen in this presidential election.
Yeah, so our organization, we're a power building organization, and we believe that voting is one way of building power in black communities. And so we've been, for the past 3 years as this organization, we've been going around. We go around all over the country in our bus. We call it the Blackest Bus in America. We go around energizing voters and educating and raising awareness and talking about the issues. And so, a lot of our travel operations have taken a hit during COVID for obvious reasons, but we're finding other ways to still get the job done, to protect the vote, to make sure that as many people as possible are aware of how to vote by mail and using it in spite of the attacks on the Postal Service that we've seen in recent months. And so we're going to be doing a whole bunch of creative things, from texting and radio ads and caravans, local caravans, not traveling state to state, but doing local caravans to register folks on spot and get folks to request their vote by mail ballot on the spot. So we'll be doing a range of things for awareness as well as excitement.
Yeah, Cliff, let's talk about that. You mentioned the Postal Service, because this is a huge topic. Obviously, we've been seeing some federal changes that could possibly impact mail-in voting this November. What are your concerns? We've obviously been hearing a lot of talk about voting early, plan your vote. What is your organization doing to help?
So we're doing a couple of things. One, we're actually still fighting, because it's not over. We're fighting in some states through litigation. There's 2 states right now where we're actually suing the state or suing the Secretary of State to expand vote by mail, dealing with issues like postage, dealing with issues like whether or not there are drop boxes where people can return ballots, dealing with issues like what kind of signatures and notary requirements there are. And so we and other organizations are still pushing states to change their policies. And we're seeing a couple of states that have changed some of those policies literally just within the past week, in states like Georgia, North Carolina, Kentucky. And so we're fighting that fight. But the other part is that we're educating folks on the process, on the changes that have taken place, keeping in mind that voting by mail, absentee, is a process that usually maybe 5 to 10% of our population uses it. So the vast majority of our population has never used this vote by mail process. So we're doing tutorials and ads and getting some influencers that'll do tutorials showing themselves casting their own vote by mail ballot in some states, and then sharing that with other voters in the states. And then there's the outreach that I mentioned, the caravans, and bringing the process to people instead of forcing people to have to go to the process.
Yeah, there's so many things people have to learn this year. Plus, there are some big headlines this morning. The Madison Square Garden is now going to be a polling place, right, to make up for some of that space that can fit maybe 60,000 voters that could be allowed there to cast votes. Barclays Center will be used here in Brooklyn as well. Mr. Albright, appreciate your time this morning and talking with us.
All right. Thanks for having me.